Hello and welcome to this recording of Superhero Ethics. If you're watching this, we're going to have about 10 seconds of silence, and then we'll jump right in. Hello and welcome to this episode of Superhero Ethics. Today, myself, Matthew, and my co-host Riki Hayashi are talking about the question, when should a hero hang up the cape? And there's an interesting story of how we got to this particular question, because it kind of came from two different directions. The first one was a question that I've often thought about, and then really came to my mind when I watched X-Men 97, is when does a hero get to say, you know what, I've done enough. It's time for me to have the spouse and family, or just go and travel the world, or just go sit in my backyard and read books because I've been putting my life on the line for however many years, and it's time for me to stop. In X-Men 97, two of the characters try to do that and are somewhat successful, but get a lot of pushback from some members of their team. And so got thinking about, like, should heroes be able to put their own personal interests above what other people think they need to do? And then the second thing was, I can't imagine why this is in my mind recently, but I've been thinking a lot about when should people decide that they need to step down and let someone else take up the reins of leadership or the hero-ness or the fight? Again, not connected to anything in the news recently, but this topic, I think, is one that also comes up in comics, in fantasy, and in all these things all the time, is when does the older generation need to step aside to make room for the next generation? When does the hero realize that he's actually not able to win the fight anymore, that he might even be causing harm? They might even be causing harm by staying in the fight, and they need to be able to train their replacement or step down or something like that. So these kind of things both come to this question of, when does a hero hang up the cape? And we're going to talk about kind of some of the factors that go into it before discussing the exact questions. But Riki, I just want to give you a chance to introduce yourself and say kind of your overall thoughts on this.
Yeah, when you brought this topic to me, for me, like, the angle I approached it from was sports, because
Yeah.
athletes get old and their productivity declines, and there are often towards the tail end of people's careers, there are discussions of, should they retire this season, like, should they keep going, etc. So that's definitely like what I thought of. In terms of the question of heroes like X-Men, superheroes, comic book heroes, I do want to say that the cynic in me says they never retire because of the publisher. And in fact, when we're talking about Cyclops and Jean Grey, the story that was based on, like, them getting married and having a kid, they actually did retire. The writer, Chris Claremont, wanted that to be the end of their story.
Right.
Wanted that to be the retirement for those characters, and then have the newer X-Men characters he was writing take over the mantle. And Marvel Comics was like, no, they're very popular, bring them back. So that, like, to me, you cannot separate the business from the art, unfortunately, in comic books, because one of the other prominent examples is Batman, right? Like, we have seen media like 50 years in the future where Batman has retired, but any quote unquote current story with Batman, he is still, I don't even know how old he is, but he's still going strong, no matter like how old he is, I guess.
Oh, for sure. And so I think for this, my angle is more not about the comic book, but about some of the on-screen media, where, in one particular, or maybe even one particular comics run or the like, where in one particular story, the character does get to hang up the cape, maybe because they want to, like Cap in the MCU movies, I think, is a great example. And as you kind of referred to, Batman and Batman Beyond, but also I think in a number of other stories. And I also would say I really like the idea of sports you brought up, primarily because I do agree that the kind of idea of the aging superstar who maybe is still very popular with the fans, but maybe their ability is fading, or maybe the fans are, that there's all these factors going in, and are they still helping the team, and are they kind of unbenchable because of how big a star they are, and is their how much is their salary being paid, and all this kind of stuff. But I also think even for the kind of more Scott and Jean Grey question, I look at someone like Andrew Luck, who was the quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts, very successful. I think he had like a 7 or 8 year career. And then while he had a bad injury, but then he came back from it and then was like, no, you know what? I'm done. I don't want to, be hobbling the rest of my life because I destroyed my knees playing the sport. I'm, I have kids. I want to spend time with them. I've made enough money to be comfortable for the rest of my life. I'm just going to retire. And a lot of Indianapolis Colts fans are very upset. And a lot of people, other folks are like, no, he gets to do what he wants to do. So, yeah, I think sports is a great metaphor. And we'll probably go back to that a number of times as well. So let's talk about what are the factors we think that go into responsibility, because I do think a lot of this question is kind of the flip side of that old, Ben Parker quote, Uncle Ben, with great power comes great responsibility. Because in some ways, I think that's the whole heart of it is what is your responsibility, both in terms of when do you get to decide I no longer want to fulfill this responsibility, and when do you have to accept I'm no longer able to fulfill this responsibility. So let me first start by asking, how much do you think the way in which a person becomes a superhero or a superstar or whatever it is, and how much agency they had over that, goes into these factors?
Into their retirement?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't think very much. I don't know. I know you have some ideas on this, so I would like to hear your thoughts on
Sure.
that.
So I kind of laid out some different ways in which someone can become a superhero. One is where they actively choose it. They volunteer or they create the circumstances themselves, something like Captain America or Tony Stark. Sometimes where it's an accident that they didn't want, but it's of their own creation, like the Hulk, or other kind of like, I think a lot of other heroes have that kind of like they're a mad scientist and they kind of made this all happen. Some who are kind of chosen by fate or destiny or genetics, like Luke Skywalker or Aang, the last Avatar. Some where it's just kind of random chance of genetics, like the X-Men. And others where someone else kind of forced it upon them, like Luke Cage. And the reason why I do think it matters is, as we'll talk, at the end of the day, I think this more matters for the first side of the question, the Scott and Jean Grey kind of a thing. But it matters for both. But I think the main way it matters is that I do think, as we'll talk about more, for the most part, I'm always going to be supportive of a hero wanting to step down, particularly if they've helped create a situation where someone else can take their place. But I think I feel that especially for people who didn't want to be heroes, who like there's a kind of like there's always this, I feel like, a kind of unfair tug, push and pull between the hero and the people they're saving. Of someone like Luke Skywalker, he's a bad example. He wants to go save it, but like someone like Aang, he's a kid throughout the whole show, but especially in the early part of season 1, he doesn't want to go and fight the Fire Kingdom. He doesn't want to go and do all these things. He wants to go play with the penguins and fly in a sky bison and do sledding and things like that. But there's this sense from a lot of others, and some say it directly, of you have this great power that no one else does, and so you have to step forward. And so I guess to me, I always feel like in some ways that's kind of unfair to the hero. And sometimes there's the kind of like when there's an existential threat, I don't ever want to be utilitarian about it, but I do sometimes feel like, look, if millions of people are going to die and there's no other way, then I do expect someone to step up. But I think I think it's worth acknowledging that that's really unfair in some ways, and that people should be able to say, I don't want to have this fight. And to me, someone like Aang or someone like Luke Cage, and even maybe someone like the Hulk, uh, it's not that I don't think someone like Tony or Cap should be able to step down, but someone who didn't want this to begin with, to me, there's even more of an impetus there of, yeah, I when you say you're done with the fight, I'm totally understanding.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, when you were saying that, the thing that came to my mind is Superman, and not specifically like when does he retire, but Superman has this problem. I'll call it a problem, where because of his super hearing, he knows when something's up, something's wrong.
Right.
And so, like, I was reading a Superman book recently where he talks about not listening, like having to have like personal time where he just like shuts out the world,
Mm-hmm.
like doesn't use his super hearing, so that if something is going on, like he doesn't hear it and he doesn't go to help, and
Yeah.
that's his choice to make. And that's not retirement, but you could see like how that segs into retirement where he just like turns it off for good, right? So I don't know, like people should be allowed to do what they want to do ultimately, like
Right.
when it comes to this. I Whether you're talking about fictional heroes or real life heroes, in some capacity, you have to honor the individual's wishes.
Right.
So I take a very you retire when you tell us you want to retire stance on things.
Right. Yeah, I think it makes sense. And I think the sports metaphor you brought up, I think in this one regard is one area where I don't think it necessarily applies to like superheroes. Because if you're a sports star, you're getting paid. Like there's a specific, if I
Mm-hmm.
do this thing that people want me to do, I will get these rewards. And that's
Yeah.
money, it's fame, it's, guest appearances, it's advertising, all these kind of things. And yet we know Peter Parker could barely pay the rent, even though he's the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. A second one of the factors that I think is really important, and I think especially with Superman, it, to me, the question of are you the only one? Because I think one of the things that I think becomes really important here on both sides of this is if you're thinking about retiring because you just want to, like you said, at the end of the day, I'm never going to say like you have this power and so society should put a gun to your head and force you to save them. Like that's not how this should work. But to me, I think it's really with someone like Scott and Jean Grey, yes, they have unique powers as mutants that nobody else has. But there is this whole bigger team that they can step down and say someone else can step up and take my place. Superman, until we get to the Justice League, and even under the Justice League, doesn't have that. There's no one who's anywhere close to his level of power until you get like a Supergirl come along, or his clones or his children or whatever. So yeah, what factor do you think it has in terms of whether or not someone else can take their place?
For me, like again, like for me personally, like no factor,
Mm,
because I think that to some, like Superman being that extreme example, like it's so funny in a lot of Justice League stuff. There will be like this thing where some, call it minor crime, is
mm-hmm.
happening, and like Batman and the Flash are on the scene, and they're like trying to stop a bank robber, right?
Right,
That's fairly minor in the Justice League scheme of things. And then like, where's Superman? It's like, oh, there like a volcano erupted halfway across the world. He's helping that.
right.
So there's that aspect of it where, yeah, like quote unquote only Superman can deal with the volcano, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
it's up to us to deal with these bank robbers. And if Superman retires, what happens with the volcano? I don't know. Like, but I don't know. It's too much. To
Yeah.
me, that's too much to put on Superman. It's too much to put on anyone.
Mm-hmm.
But because of this conceit in the storytelling, when a hero retires, it is often because of some kind of catastrophic event,
Mm-hmm.
either like like something with their body, right? Like they lose their
Right.
powers, is a common trope. An injury like has happened, or a loss, like the personal loss. Like Super Lois Lane dies, and Superman like gets depressed, understandably, and like flies off into space
Yeah.
and is gone. And yeah, I mean that is a way to move that narrative
Mm-hmm.
into the retirement narrative. I hate it because
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think these people, these heroes should just be allowed to say like, I don't want to do this anymore. But
Yeah.
that's really not how it works, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, I think in some ways it's that flip side to me where this question of is there someone else there? Because I think you're right. Like even if there isn't someone else to necessarily deal with a volcano, like I don't. There is an extent to which, and I think some of the Superman stories now have explored this, of when you have that one heroic figure who will always come to the rescue, does that stop other people from remembering how they can help themselves, and things like that?
Exactly.
To me, though, the most important part of the is there someone else to take your side is on more that other side of when should someone recognize that they need to step down?
Well,
Because
let
I
me let
think,
me just, if I may,
go ahead.
regarding like can anyone else step up, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
one of my favorite scenes in the first Avengers movie, in the
Mm-hmm.
Battle of New York, when Captain America is directing some New York police officers to help people, and he's like, go to like evacuate those people from that building, like make sure
Mm-hmm.
like this road is clear of any danger. And it is normal, unpowered people helping other people
Yeah.
and doing what they can, even though like in front of them is, the Marvel's version of a god, a superhero
Yeah.
is like fighting the aliens. But it's like, what can we normal people do? And
Yeah.
showing scenes like that in superhero media, I think carries a lot of weight and a lot of power, because even though we want to enjoy these stories and watch the superhero fights, we also want to feel like we can not necessarily be a hero, but step up and
Yeah.
contribute when something bad happens. I
You know,
think
in
that's
Cap-
important.
Very much so. In Captain America: Winter Soldier, there are just the non-powered humans who are in the control centers of the Triskelions, and they don't want to go along with what Hydra is saying. Um, V for Vendetta, one of my favorite movies. I often talk on how the most important thing that V does is inspire normal people to rise up and fight back. The, the, the other direction that I was going to go with this whole question of is someone else ready to step up is that I think one of the things that makes it harder for a lot of people to step down is ego. And I don't mean it like I think we often say ego in a very negative way. I don't just mean like, oh, they're conceited, they're arrogant. But I think in order to be a hero, like you often start by convincing yourself, I'm the only one who can do this, so I have to do it. And then it's very hard to let go of that. And I'll tell a personal story. When I went to grad school, I went to grad school to become a pastor, but specifically in a social justice, very focused way, and that's what the school was all about. And on the opening day, on the opening day commencements and all that, the dean of the school got up and he said, "Look, all of you are here because you want to make the world a better place, and all of you are here because you think that you need to help make the world a better place. Please take a look to the students to your right and the students to your left." And then he said, each of those people wants to do the same thing you do, and they're going to be just as good at it. So it's okay to sometimes take a break. And I was 24. I was ready to go, fix the world. I was utterly convinced of my own ability to do this. I had a lot to learn. And that hit me hard because part of me was like, no, like I have it, not that I'm necessarily better, but I have a unique talent that no one else does. I'm sure all these people do, but the world needs me specifically. And the idea that someone else could take my place just was unthinkable to me. Until he said that, then it really challenged me. And I was like, oh, okay. I'm like, I don't want to say that I just ignored the guy. I completely listened to him. But I think that has to be even more so true here when, you have been at one point told you're the only one. We need you to do this. And then later people realize, okay, maybe actually someone else can step up. So I just think it's a very important part in the whole question of like, when can you step down? Some part is also being able to, can you let go of the thought? Like, can everyone, and maybe this is back just the same question from two different directions. The first part is, can everyone else accept that they don't need you? And the second is, can you accept that they don't need you?
Yeah. This is why, for me, like the sports metaphor
Mm-hmm.
speaks so much. My favorite basketball player of all time is Tim Duncan. He
Mm-hmm.
was a great power forward for the San Antonio Spurs. I pulled up his stat page. He was a two-time MVP back in the early 2000s and won multiple championships with the Spurs. And at the end of his career, towards the end of his career, the Spurs got some younger players. Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, Kawhi Leonard, I believe, was also overlapped.
Mm-hmm.
And Tim Duncan accepted a lesser role in the offense. Like
Mm.
he got the ball less, he shot less, he set more screens. He was helping his teammates rather than being the focal point because he had lost a step. He was older, and I think they won another championship like in one of his final seasons.
They did,
And
yeah.
I'm looking at it like he scored 8.6 points a game in his final season before he retired. And this
Yeah.
is a man like that's the only season in his career where he scored less than 10 points a game. And it was an intentional choice by him and the coach Popovich and the team to do that and structure their offense differently than it had been in the past
Yeah.
with Tim Duncan as the centerpiece. And that selflessness, like that's why I admire him. Like he was always that kind of player and had that kind of
Mm-hmm.
team first mindset. And that to me, when I thought of this topic of like how do you, not just retire, but also ramp down your role potentially
Yeah.
because you don't have the skills and the tools that you used to.
And that's actually a great point that I hadn't really discussed until now, that it's not a binary. It's not either you're out there fighting volcanoes and bank robbers every single day, or you're at home with Lois Lane ignoring everything. There's definitely this middle ground of, can you take a reduced role? And I want to talk about how that plays out in some of the superhero stories, but I also have my own sports story about this. I'm a huge baseball fan, as I know you, and the team that I grew up watching, and so will always be my favorite, is the mid 80s New York Mets, who won the World Championship in 86 and probably could have won it a couple more years, but had some very, well-known drug problems and other problems, which, a very chaotic mix of players, as well as some bad general manager issues and all sorts of stuff like that. And I also really love baseball simulation computer games where, you get to make the decision of like, when you put in this pitcher, when do you pinch hit, all these things. I love them. And I'm playing with them right now, and I'm playing a mid-80s New York Mets team. But I'm realizing that there's one player who the computer has no idea how valuable he is. And that's Rusty Staub.
Is that a real player?
Yep, that's a real player. As he was a rather large fellow. He was redheaded. Maybe that's also part of why I love him. He played in Montreal for many years and was known as Le Grand Orange. And, he was never going to be a Hall of Famer, but he had a solid career. He was a good hitter.
Oh, yeah. 23-year career. Wow.
Yeah, he was around for a long time. And by the time he got to the Mets, he was almost never going to be a starter. He was mostly a, late innings fill-in the outfield and a lot of times a pinch hitter. And he was a pretty good pinch hitter. But far and away, and I read a lot of books by Mets players and also a lot of journalism about them. One thing that they all constantly say is that as chaotic as we were, we would have utterly fallen apart if it wasn't for Rusty. Because he was this older, experienced player who, kind of like we were saying with Tim Duncan, but even more so because he's playing even less, as a player on the bench, was constantly talking to players about like, okay, well, I'm seeing the pitcher do this kind of thing, so you should adjust this way, or hey, I'm noticing this thing in your hitting stance, you should change this, or just hey, you've been going out partying the last 3 nights, and I can see it affecting you. Like, he was kind of like that uncle, or that father figure
Like
that
a
a lot of the
player
players.
coach
Yeah,
almost.
very, very much so. And no statistics are ever going to show it. And he didn't get to do what he used to do, but he was like a player coach. I think is the perfect way to describe it, and was an essential part to the Mets winning the World Series in ways that will never be recognized in the statistics books. And that couldn't have happened unless, as you said, he was willing to say, you know what, I would hurt the team if I was a starting player, so I could retire, but also I could take this reduced role and then do something else. So let's now actually bring it back to some of the other shows, because one of the examples that I've been thinking about most as a character who retired, but I realize actually doesn't, he does exactly what we're talking about, is Batman and Batman Beyond. Do you know the story? Do you know that show well?
Yeah, absolutely.
So do you want to give us like a little introduction to like why it is that Batman decides to change his role and what happens there?
I actually don't know why. I mean, he's old.
Okay.
Like Batman Beyond takes place in like, I don't know, 2050, 2060, something like that. Like quote unquote the future.
Yeah, it's supposed to be about like 30 to 40 years after Batman the Animated Series. It's very much in that continuity. Kevin Conroy still doing the voice of Batman. So I think it's like the 2020s, but because it's like 40 years in the future from the 1980s or 90s, maybe the 2030s. But he's still trying to fight, but yeah, his physical skills have deteriorated. He's not able to do the things he needs to do anymore. And he gets into a fight and winds up picking up a gun, because it's the only way he can get out of a difficult situation. Like, it's not his gun, but there's a gun lying around, and he picks it up and uses it. I don't think he fires it, but he picks it up in order to like threaten the bad guy so that he can like take them down or whatever. And it horrifies him, because
I've forgotten that.
His whole ideal was always, I don't want to use guns. I will never use guns. And the fact that he was no longer able to do it without picking up a gun makes him realize, wait, I can't do this anymore. And then at the same time, there's this other character who comes along who is able to do all the physical things Batman used to do. And so he becomes Batman, and Bruce Wayne becomes the man in the chair. Basically, he's still also called Batman, but he's the person sitting at home on the computer, directing the new Batman, telling him what to do, telling him, okay, there's like an empty room this way, this kind of thing, doing the research. It's a phenomenal show. I think it's one of my favorite Batman shows. But it's really about this idea that, like a couple of our listeners, when I asked about this topic, wrote in suggesting people like Zorro and the Dread Pirate Roberts, where the whole thing is based on the idea that someday you'll retire and you'll not only pass it on to someone else, but you'll train them to take your place. And this feels very much like that. It feels like they're kind of establishing that like Batman doesn't have to be one person, and any one person can step down and say, yeah, I'm no longer going to be Batman.
Yeah. Do you know about, you've seen the Justice League epilogue to that?
Yes. Yeah.
I think I don't like that.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I won't spoil it, but yeah, we've actually done a couple of episodes about that, and it might actually, you know what? I think that's going to be our bonus content today for members. We'll talk more about that. Wait, no, I haven't seen it in too long. We're not going to do that. I'll take that whole part out. Let me start. Yeah, I can see that. Paul and I actually did a whole episode about that. I'll see if I can put in the show notes. It's from a while ago. I'm not sure I can find it, but I will definitely. You can probably search for it. Need to take it one more time. Yeah, Paul and I actually did a whole episode about that. Folks can definitely find it. It's searching for Batman Beyond. But also, yeah, Riki and I, you and I should talk about that at some other point. I haven't seen it long enough. I don't remember the details, but I'm sure there's a lot to discuss there.
So when you mentioned the man in the chair, I had already been thinking this. And to me, one of the most important examples of not a retirement, but a transition in role was, in fact, in my opinion, the original person in the chair, Barbara Gordon, Oracle. That girl to Oracle, she was shot by the Joker in The Killing Joke and paralyzed, and would have legitimately been okay to retire from superheroing at that point, right? she chose to stay on and became the character Oracle, who is like the archetype of the computer genius who's like directing the traffic and on the comms with all the other heroes of the Bat
Mm-hmm.
family. And like, not, again, like, I'm pretty sure like that she set the archetype, or at least was like the most popular version that led
Mm-hmm.
to a lot of other similar characters like her. And that's again, like, she could have retired, but she
Yeah.
chose. I'm not even going to say like diminished role. It's a different role that
Yeah.
was essential and needed at the time, because we, like, as a society, was also transforming into a digital society. So it was a good way to incorporate that into the
Yeah.
story as well.
Yeah. I think that's so true. And I'll say, not every Oracle episode or issue was perfectly done by any means, but overall, I feel like the character was also a huge step for disability representation in a way that I love, because it's exactly that. There's a joke that a lot of people use that's kind of, I think there's a lot of truth to. Not it's not 100%, but it's that all of us are only temporarily, sorry, all of us are currently, it's that all of us are temporarily able-bodied, meaning that some of us might be able-bodied our entire lives, but the overwhelming majority of people are going to become less physically able, and maybe to a point of that you consider it disabled. I'm not going to get into like where that line is by any means, or if there even is a line. But many of us are not going to have the abilities that we have at a later point in our life. And so her being able to, and for her, it's not because of aging, as you said, it's because of a traumatic wound that she receives. And so for her to say, okay, I no longer have the abilities to do the things I used to, but I still have these abilities and I can do other things. To me, that's again a great example of what we're talking about. The ability to kind of recognize, like, hey, I can't do the job anymore, but I can still do something else. But
Yeah.
also, as you said, if like, a year later, she was like, you know what, I'm still having nightmares about when Joker shot me, or just I met someone cute and I want to focus on them, or or just want to go hike in the mountain, or not hike, but, hike. Yeah, you just watch wheelchair hike routes. If she wants to do any of those things, that's perfectly good. It doesn't have to be because of the trauma.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, like, she definitely sets up the Batman Beyond version of Bruce Wayne. Actually,
Mm-hmm.
she's in that story too, right? She becomes the police commissioner, doesn't she?
Yeah.
In that
Yep.
future? Oh dear.
Yeah. She had that is very antagonistic, kind of a fun three-way dynamic between her, Bruce Wayne, and Tony, I believe is the name of the person who takes over. Um, with both of them being kind of parental figures to him and pulling him in different directions. So I think
Batman is Terry McGinnis.
Terry McGinnis, not Tony, is Terry. Thank you. So I feel like of the two big questions we started with, we're pretty much on solid agreement that a hero should be able to retire whenever they want to retire. That like
Please do.
great power comes with great responsibility, but part of the responsibility is also to yourself and to your family, and that you have to figure out how to, superheroes get work-life balance just like anybody else. And well, I think there's some truth to the idea of sometimes, like, there is this existential threat or whatever, and if you don't step up, maybe no one else will. But also, a lot of times, if you don't step up, someone else might. You might even know, or how can you train that person?
Hmm.
So let's talk to the other side of when maybe. So let's turn to the other side of when the hero should be stepping down, but aren't necessarily wanting to. Just in general, like, why do you think this would happen? Like, if a hero wants to put their life at risk, even if they're not as good at it as they used to be, why is that a problem?
Uh, okay. What do you have an example of this? Because again, like, we're at the whims of the storyteller, and it's like, why would they be telling this story, I guess, is my question.
Right.
And when have they done so? Because
Right.
I struggle to think of a story like this.
Mm.
um the Batman Beyond thing, like, he's so old in
Right.
that, right? Like, it's obvious to everyone that he should not be Batman. But where's kind of our creaky, like midlife crisis, like feeling a little creak in the back, Bruce Wayne. We got
Mm-hmm.
an interesting bit of this in Spider-Man. What was the No Way Home? Right when
Mm-hmm.
we get the Tobey Maguire and the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man came
Mm-hmm.
in, and they were talking to each other about like, yeah, like my back's bothering me now, like I can't quite do it, like,
Yep.
um, and I guess from Spider-Verse, Peter B. Parker is
Mm-hmm.
kind of like he's older and also becomes a father,
Yep.
although he's still superheroing as a dad.
Right.
But I think like that's kind of the character maybe
Mm-hmm.
that is like maybe it's time to hang it, like right at that point where it's like you should start thinking about hanging it up,
Right.
is like
I,
the middle-aged Spider-Man.
for me, I think one of the examples that comes to mind is Professor X in the movie Logan, where he is getting older and some of the mental issues that can set in for people. And I don't know what the lines are between just aging and mental fading versus dementia versus like other things. So I don't want to like use medical terms, but just for many people, mental facilities can start to fade. And in Professor X's case, not only does it make him less able to help, but he causes harm. And there are times where he can't control his powers anymore, and lots of people die in that movie. To me, that's kind of one of the most and part of the movie is him still wanting to help and Logan having to help him understand like you can't do this anymore. So I think that's one of my first examples. I don't think many other examples come up in like MCU and DC stuff because yeah, they don't want to retire that hero.
But I
Except
like
in well, so I was gonna say I do think that in a lot of um, often the origin story of our original of our hero is often about the older person having to realize that they need to step down, and so that cause that's where I think we see it there. But also, I just feel like oh God, I'm trying to.
well, I was gonna
There's
say
some
I like what's going on in the MCU because they are superhero stories, but they have to deal with the reality of the age of the actors portraying them,
right.
and them aging out of this range where it's realistic for them to be playing this hero, or even like for them to be doing the physicality of some of the stunts perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Chris Evans has definitely commented publicly about not wanting to keep his body in this
Yeah.
ridiculous shape, like the superhero physique shape that is forced upon him by media, and that is absolutely like his right to not do that anymore. I think in general, the like women have been dealing with this for a lot longer, like the supermodel body. But
Mm-hmm.
men now, like we're getting more stories of the lengths that they go to have like the six packs and the pecs and stuff. And they shouldn't be forced to do that just because we want eye candy. Like we can have like realistic, strong looking bodies, in
There
my
was
opinion.
some action star from the '90s. I can't remember who it was. Possibly Dolph Lundgren. I'm not sure. Actually, I don't think it's him. But who was known for like being very muscled in these movies, and then kind of just stopped. And I remember an interview with him where someone asked him why. It's like, you know what? I remembered how much I love cheeseburgers, and I just wanted to eat what I wanted to eat instead of having this like very exacting diet that I used to have.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, I think that's another great example. And I think with me though, in terms of like when we're talking about the harm that folks can do, I think Batman's case and Batman Beyond, it's a real question of he's feeling like he can't hold to his own personal values anymore. In some of the other cases I've seen, I think some of the other factors that come up is like, are you actually doing harm instead of helping? Like, are you not? Are you are you just not able to do the job in a way that like because you're the one trying to do it, it's not going to get done, and that's really a problem. But also, I keep thinking about this question of younger generations. Of when older people stay in those roles for so long, how much does it prevent the next generation from actually being able to take over from them when they're ready to step down or just get killed or whatever it is?
Yeah, I mean, this is important like for storytelling, but also for like setting an example for real people, right? Because
Right.
again, like the MCU right now is in this transition phase of the original six like
Hmm.
are gone, and we had Endgame, and they all died, retired, etc. And now, in theory, like we should be getting the new Avengers or the Young Avengers, whatever like their configuration is going to be, and it's kind of taken a while to see where this is all going. But it's so important because like yes, the real life actors are too old to keep doing this, but for the story as well, like we want these new characters and these new heroes to have a chance to do their thing, and the
Hmm.
actors too. Like Iman Vellani is a treasure as
Yeah.
Miss Marvel, um, and yeah, it sets a real life example for people to make this transition,
Yeah.
right? To have Steve Rogers pass the shield literally to
Hmm.
Falcon.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's so true, and I think that oh, I can't say that I remember this movie well because it was, as the own actor has pointed out, very, very bad. But I think it's the Ryan Reynolds Green Lantern where
Huh.
no, it's not that. It's listeners help right in because like this is a trope that I know that I have seen in some like not as popular but in a couple of superhero movies where the movie starts with the hero not being able to do what he used to be able to do, and that's why he reluctantly has to pass it on. I know in some of the Zorro movies, this has definitely been the case. I believe
Well,
the Anthony Hopkins Antonio Banderas one. At first, Anthony Hopkins does not want to stop being Zorro, but he has to realize like he's not able to do it anymore, and he's causing harm, and so that means he has to now train the next one.
yeah, I mean, Green Lantern rings are literally passed on, but
Right,
in that story, Avin Sur dies. Like he crash lands on Earth and dies, and that's how Hal Jordan gets the ring.
right. How did John Stewart get his?
John's. I think John Stewart, his. I don't know. The early days of like each of the lanterns,
Uh
I
huh.
believe like Hal Jordan's ring goes to John Stewart. And it could be like when he quote unquote died or retired or something.
Mm
But for a while, like there was only one Green Lantern on Earth. Now, like there's four or five.
hmm. Fair, fair.
But it used to be like a direct line of succession between
Yeah,
them.
yeah. And so another good. Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say the only one like I remember definitively is Kyle Rayner gets
Uh
his
huh.
ring because Hal Jordan becomes a villain. He becomes Parallax, and like
Mm,
Ganthet, the last Guardian, is like you have to be the one to carry on the legacy of Green Lanterns. So
right.
that one I know is not specifically Hal Jordan's ring.
Yeah, that makes sense. I also think there's example. We've mostly been talking about physical infirmity, but I think there's also lots of examples of where someone realizes that they're now starting to do this for the wrong reason. You know, where it's actually that instead of trying to fight for good, they're now trying to like get vengeance on the bad. And I think that's in the actually one of the best examples of a lot of these is the TV show Titans. Uh, Teen Titans has been a very popular TV show, and I think that, but that's more about training them to be fight alongside the adult versions. The TV show Titans, which is at times incredibly cheesy and sometimes has awful storytelling, but at times is really, really brilliant. It has great acting. It's all about like those Teen Titans now as adults, and they're all in their young 20s. And it was a CW show, so of course they're all dating each other, and they're all wearing incredible outfits, and they all, the things like that. But also a lot of what it's about, like in that one, the character of Batman is having trouble recognizing that he should hang it up, and it's part
Hmm.
of why Dick Grayson has really kind of drawn away from him. Um, there's another character who I think is Green Arrow, but I'm not sure, who is recognizing that he just actually is very distracted with his family life, but isn't willing to admit that yet, and isn't willing to say like, yeah, I'm not able to do this anymore. And so like the younger Arrows are I think there's two are chafing under that. So yeah, I think there's a lot of stories there. But Riki, I know for this particular question, you actually went to sports again. Say more like in a case like Tim Duncan, like, yeah, it was great that he could take a different role. Other players retire, but what's wrong with a player wanting to just play as long as they want?
I mean, I don't know if I can say wrong, but a player hanging on too long, because there are resources, right, in sports.
Yeah.
There's a certain number of roster spots you can have for players. And so if you devote one to this person, like that's one fewer spots you have. And playing time as well. Like especially you see this a lot in basketball, when the older player retire or like is in their final season, but they were a superstar.
Yeah.
Right? Like a Michael Jordan or a Kobe Bryant type in their final season, they're still Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant. They still want to shoot like 30 times a game, 20 times a game. I don't know. A lot, because you mentioned earlier the ego, right? It's hard to put that aside. I think Tim Duncan, like that's why I admire him so much, is like it was such a different end of career trajectory to a lot of legitimate superstars when they're in their decline phase. In basketball, like I think LeBron James right now, we're seeing the end of his career. Like he got the scoring title, like the all-time scoring title.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a question of like whether his pursuit of that and his need to keep scoring points at his age was a detriment to the team, like to winning, to the development of the next generation of players, right? Like they're not getting as many looks, like all the ball is constantly going to LeBron type of thing. But it's like, also a business, and fans, want to see LeBron James, especially, if it's his last season. Like that is a legitimate thing that leads to ticket sale bumps. Is like, hey, come, this is your last chance to see LeBron James. I wish I had taken the opportunity to see Ichiro Suzuki in baseball when he retired, before he retired. I never got a chance to see him play live. So if they had announced like this is Ichiro's final season, like I would have, at the time I should have tried to go see a game, right? So it's a weird balance between what the player wants, what the franchise wants or needs, and what the fans want. It's not like a one answer fits all.
Yeah. No, I think that's all really true. And I think that, like, we've talked about this being ego, but again, I think it's not that we're necessarily talking about people being arrogant. I think it often comes from a very good place of, when earlier in your career, as a superhero or a politician or a crime or a sports star or anything, it gets into your head and everyone around you is telling you, we can't do this without you. We need you. And yeah, it's probably great. You probably have a lot of personal interest in it. And, it feels great to be the winner. But like, as a hero, you are doing good for other people. And whether it's, winning championships that just brings a lot of joy to your fans, or is, like saving the world. And so I think that like ego, I want a kind of more positive, but still like understanding why it's a problem word. Because yeah, it's basically that idea of like, it's ego combined with a very legitimate responsibility of, I don't want the world to fall apart. And up until now, I have been the one who had to save the world. So accepting the idea that not only can I not save the world anymore, but someone else could do it better than me, it's not only ego, it's like it's a challenge to your self-image, Like I wonder how many of these heroes, especially, I know this happens in sports a lot and in other fields as well, your sense of self becomes, I am the person who saves this. I am the person who hits the game-winning shot. I am the person who fights the volcano. And so when you have to realize maybe someone else is better able to do that, it's really hard, because then you have to ask, who am I instead?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with calling it ego, and whether you think of that positively or negatively, you cannot have like this caliber of player without ego.
Yeah.
Like the thought process of, I am the best, I can beat this person on the dribble or whatever, like I can hit a home run off this pitcher. that is part of the psychology of sports. And if you don't have that, like there are so many talented players, in my opinion, that don't reach maybe the heights that they should because of psychology, because they have self-doubt and that leads to them not trying,
Hmm.
something or whatever. So I think it's absolutely ego and it's fine. Like there can be positives, there can be negatives.
Yeah,
And
I
I
think.
want to throw out like the final player for me that I thought of in all of this um, was John Elway. He was a
Mm,
quarterback for the Denver Broncos. And he, at the end of his career, he won back to back Super Bowls with the Broncos and then retired after the second one.
yeah,
And he was at the top of his game. Probably could have played, a couple more seasons. Who knows, like how good he would have been? But he was like, "That's it. Like it doesn't get better than this."
yeah.
And it's like there are some examples of that where it's like a storybook moment, and it's like, yeah, why don't we just call it here before we see that decline? And maybe he was already like feeling it, like physically
Yeah.
or like just mental fatigue was like, why I just won two Super Bowls. Like, why would I want to keep doing this?
No, I think you're right, especially because I would say, as a New York Jets fan, because my team keeps signing these people, you see examples like Brett Favre and I'm afraid Aaron Rodgers, but also a lot of others who don't get to that point and they keep trying and they keep trying and they get worse and worse.
Mm-hmm.
Joe
But
Montana eventually had Joe Montana. I think there's an argument that he's the best quarterback of all time. He's certainly in the top three or top five, however you want to do it. We're not a sportscast. Don't write in. Yeah, actually, you should write in whatever you want. We're not a sportscast.
we
But
could be,
if I remember, like he had to be benched eventually, and that was a really hard thing, in part because he was so popular with the fans again, and he was such a
yeah.
big name. And I think he did retire with some amount of grace, but there have definitely been some others who it's really hard for them to step aside and to realize that it's not their time anymore. So
And
yeah, good.
I do not blame. Let's see. I don't blame the players. I think you
Hmm.
can put some blame on organizations if they, maybe like give too much money to a player or the contract is too long, or you just like they already have a viable replacement. It's like, why are you delaying the promotion of the replacement type of thing?
Yeah,
But for the player themselves, again, like similar to the hero thing, like they can choose when to retire. They should be allowed to choose, when they retire. Is like if they want to keep playing, they should
right.
be allowed to as long as they are physically able. I mean, there was a pitcher named Jamie Moyer who pitched I want to say until he was like 49 his
Something
final
like that. Yeah.
season. And he didn't have it in the traditional sense. Like his quote unquote fastball was like 81 miles per hour when like pitchers are throwing 90 to 100, right?
Hmm.
But he had that smarts, the wily like
Yeah.
controlled pitcher. And again, like he could have retired any time like after like
Yeah.
35 and it would have been fine. But he loved it and he was still effective enough
Yeah.
for what he was doing. And why like it's a lovely story. I love seeing stats for him of like the oldest player to do X, oldest player to do Y.
Yeah.
It's just a
Well,
good story.
especially because it kind of underlines, if you throw 80-mile-an-hour ball, if you throw the ball at 80 miles an hour most of the time, you're damaging your arm at a much slower rate than if you're trying to throw it 100 miles an hour every single time.
Yeah.
But also, I think that maybe brings up the last good point here, which is the question of who you're accountable and who is going to tell you the hard truth. Because in a situation like what we're talking about here, I think I agree with you in part because, like I said, like I don't blame Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers for taking the money from the idiotic GMs that my team has. I blame the GMs for continuing to give them the money. And who
Yeah.
knows? Maybe Aaron Rodgers is going to carry my team to a Super Bowl, and I'll be incredibly grumpy about it, but I'll love it because my team has never won a Super Bowl in my lifetime. But
But again, it's a business decision too. And then some
right,
part of their calculus is no doubt we can sell, some percentage more tickets because
yeah.
people will want to come to see this player
Well, and I guess yeah, that's totally true. And
or jersey sales or whatever.
Pete Rose declined a lot in his later years, but people wanted to go see, like, when is he going to break the hit record by Ty Cobb, and then what's going to happen next, and and he was a player manager and all this kind of stuff. But what I'm getting at here is that in most of the fields we're talking about in our own world, not all, there's someone else there's someone else who gets to make the decision, or at least strongly encourage them to say, hey, you were great, Joe Montana, but Steve Young is here and you just don't have the skills you did 5 years ago, so we're not going to start you today. And I think that, who's going to say that Superman? In the early Superman stories, no one. Maybe Lois Lane. In later stories, though, Batman and Wonder Woman and the others who are kind of like on. Actually, no, Superman's a bad example because I think you would have listened to Jimmy Olsen or Lois Lane about that too. But I think it's why superhero teams, I think, are so essential. It's why superheroes feeling like there's others they listen to, because then there's someone who can point out that hard truth to them. I think we see in our own world that when you just kind of, how many like celebrities have put out, sports stars have put out these like appallingly bad rap videos or something like that, because everyone around them is just going to say, oh, you're awesome, everything you do is awesome. And I say this as, my favorite team in the world put out Let's Go Mets, which is god awful. But yeah, I come to that point all the time, but I think with this especially, that question of, just having other people you're accountable to, both so that you can say, having other people you're accountable and having that go both ways. So that Wolverine should be able to say, Scott and Jean will miss you, Jean especially, but yeah, go take care of your baby. I get it. And also that the people can say, hey, Professor X, hey, whoever it is, you've done a great job, but it's time for you to step down and let someone else do it.
I mean, Wolverine is an interesting one. Let's talk about that real quick, because we all thought Logan was the final like Hugh Jackman Wolverine, and now we are weeks away from Deadpool and Wolverine coming out, prominently featuring Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, a variant of some weird timey-wimey stuff.
Yeah.
And now there are questions and discussions of, should the MCU just cast Hugh Jackman as Wolverine like for the next 10 more years? Because people think he still has it. So I don't know, like if he wants to do it, let him do it. I think like they should bring someone else in, someone new in, but it's like ultimately his decision to make. It's Marvel Studios' decision to make. And whatever direction they go in is fine.
I haven't seen any of the previews or trailers, but my sense is, just from a little bit I've known, and also what I know about Deadpool, this is kind of Hugh Jackman's Oracle days. Not that he's physically unable to do the fighting of Wolverine anymore, but that like he's not coming in to play the super serious Wolverine that he did such an incredible job of. He's coming in to flirt with Ryan Reynolds and to create as much fan fiction as he possibly can, and to have fun, being kind of almost a parody of his own character, as everything in Deadpool has always been. So I think it's interesting that he has come back in a different way. It'll be fun to see.
And I want to go back to Jamie Moyer. He did pitch his final season. He was 49 because 2 years prior to that, he had Tommy John shoulder surgery. So I believe he is also the oldest player to have Tommy John surgery and then pitch again.
Wow.
Just unbelievable career. And there's like, statistically, there's no way he's a Hall of Famer, unfortunately. Like, he didn't get voted in. But, people talk about the Hall of Very Good. There should be some kind of hall to honor him and his story in the game. I love him so much.
Hold on, I'm doing quick math. Yeah, no, I think it's great. The Mets for a couple years in the 2000s had a pinch hitter again, Julio Franco, who also played until he was 49, and he was just amazing. It was just so much fun watching that. It's one thing I'll say about baseball. One reason I love it is, I could work all my life on my basketball skills, as I think it was, I remember who said this, but you can't teach tall. I'm never going to be big enough or athletic enough to be a basketball player or a football player. But oh God, why can't I remember his name? The fat Met who he was on the Indians for a long time, and then
Bartolo Colon.
Yes. But when Bartolo Colon stepped up, and for the Mets, I was in my 30s. He was a couple years, and I was gaining weight already. I didn't feel great about my body. Bartolo Colon was older than me and was significantly heavier than me. And like you could see his beer gut like every time he pitched. And yet he was an amazing pitcher. And in one of like his last season, he hit his first home run ever as a pitcher while he was batting. And it was just such a great moment. So
Bartolo Colon retired after 2018 at the age of 45. So he also had like a long,
yeah,
long career. And he's like a borderline Hall of Famer, I would say. 247 career wins.
yeah.
When is he on the ballot?
If he retired in 2015, he should be. I think it's 5 years, so he should have been.
2018. So was he
Oh,
on the ballot last year? I'm
I
sure
think
he'll get some votes.
Yeah, I think at this point we've wandered quite far from our topic. So, Riki, any last comments before we wrap up, and then we'll have a bonus section. We're gonna. My mind is blank. Do you have any ideas for a bonus section? I'll cut this out later.
I don't know. Keep talking about sports.
Talk about each other. All right, we've got. All right, I think we've now wandered pretty far from the point. So we're gonna have a bonus section where Riki and I are gonna talk about baseball a little bit more. I think hopefully if you love that, great. If not, we'll have better product. Let me do it again. If you love that, great. If you're not, write in with other ideas you want us to have for bonus content. A lot of times we have really good ones. Sometimes, forever this week, we've both been a little crazed and able to come up with one, but we also just want to talk about baseball. But Riki, any other last thoughts on this topic?
No, retire when you want, whether you're a superhero or an athlete or anything. I guess normal people can't retire until they have enough money, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I'm a little. I think if it's you're retiring when you still can do it because someone else can take your place, great. If you're no longer able to do the job, listen to the people who are telling you need to step down. That's where I come down on it. Riki, as always, this is fantastic conversation. Listeners, let us know what you think. Of course, try to become a member. It will be only $5 a month, $55 a year. You get bonus content, you get full bonus episodes, and you help us keep the lights on, help us do all the things we're doing, and just get us support a great podcast. So on behalf of myself and Riki, thank you all so very much. We have spoken. All right, so why is Ichiro so important to you as a player?
I mean, because he's Japanese. that is like number one with a bullet.
Let me ask that a different way. So tell me more about what Ichiro meant to you. Like obviously the first major Japanese player to come over and do so well here, I'm sure had to mean a lot to you. Tell us more about like what that meant to you.
Well, he was the first Japanese position player because Hideo Nomo in the 90s was
that's right.
the first star to come over. And there was another player like in the 50s or 60s or something, I believe, who played Japanese. But Nomo was the one who like broke through to like the current what we have now.
Right.
Because he had to change the system, like the legality of whether a NPB player could even play in the majors was up for question.
That's the Japanese league?
Yeah. And he had to quote unquote retire officially for him to be eligible. And that was like the loophole, the Nomo loophole. And after that, they negotiated what is now the posting system, where major league teams pay the Japanese team for the right to even negotiate with their players. And so Ichiro was the first position player. And listen, like stereotypes exist. Asian, like as an Asian man, we are traditionally viewed as physically less capable, I would say, than, like white or especially black athletes, like athletically. And as a result of that, like there was a lot of racism baked into the discussion especially when Ichiro came over. Like he was
Hmm.
undisputably like the biggest star in Japan, and people were like, he'll be like a good fourth outfielder
Yeah.
in the major leagues, and that's like that was disrespectful to him, disrespectful to the entire Japanese baseball league. Like to be like, like
Yeah.
they're no better than the minor leagues, right?
Right, because he'd been a
And
major star in Japan, and I think
yeah,
that, yeah, there's a kind of jingoism of like, oh, but the major leagues are so much better. A lot of people said like, well,
yeah,
then that's no
he
different
can't
than someone being a star in the minors.
he can't catch up to a major league fastball, right? That type of talk. Like I listened to it all, and
Yeah.
I didn't watch Ichiro play. Like I didn't have like Japanese baseball broadcast, so I didn't know. And like the statistical like field in baseball, like sabermetrics wasn't advanced enough at the time to like translate the stats. Because now you can take someone's stats in any league and like run adjustments and kind of like predict what that stat would be in your league or like,
Hmm.
National League versus American, like whatever, like ballpark adjustments and stuff. So now like you can roughly tell. But at the time, it was a question. And when he first came over and started hitting, everyone was just like, "Oh, okay, we
Yeah.
get it now. He is a star." Because he was rookie of the year, 27-year-old rookie, but that's how they do it.
Yeah.
His first year in the majors, and MVP in his first season. He
Hmm.
set the single season hit record, I believe, 252. I want to say, is
Sounds
that
about right.
right?
Yeah.
He got to 3,000 hits in the major leagues, despite again like only coming over when he was 27. And that like in this discussion of like hanging on, he definitely hung on a couple of seasons in order to get those final hits to get to 3,000. Like let me take a look. But also like he is in my opinion, and like when you combine his Japanese and U.S. stats, he has more hits than Pete Rose. So to
Yeah.
me, like I consider him to be the all-time hit king, and you can
Yeah.
argue about that in the comments all you want.
Well,
Oh no, 262 hits is a single
oh
season
wow.
record, 3,089 for his career. So yeah, he
Hmm.
did it all.
And I think it's such an important story because he was by no means the first non-American player to come over and have a big impact. Excuse me. Um, he was by no means the first non-American player to come over and have a huge impact. There have been Dominican and Mexican and players from all over Latin America who had a huge impact in baseball all the way back to Roberto Clemente in the 60s. I think maybe even in the 50s. But for the most part, those are players who got signed, or now I think there is finally an international kind of draft system when they're like 16 or 17. Like they come over to America either because scouts go and find them or because they come here. Ichiro was someone different, of someone who had had a professional career, 5 or 6 years in his own league, and then was coming to the United States. And I think that's part of why it was so challenging for a lot of people because we call baseball the World Championship, which is ridiculous because there's 1.5 countries involved. It's America, and then it used to be 2 teams in Canada. Now it's 1 team in Canada. Now there's the World Baseball Classic or World Baseball
Mm-hmm.
Cup, whatever they're calling it these days. But I think baseball still calls itself the World Championship.
The
There's,
World
there's,
Series.
yeah, the World Series, exactly. There's very much this idea of, and I think it is somewhat deserved, but that for most of its history, Major League Baseball was the literal major leagues in the world. And while I still think there's some truth to that, I think we're getting to a point where that's more because of how much money is involved than necessarily how much talent's involved. And so, yeah, I remember an article that I read when he came up that was comparing what he did to Jackie Robinson, and they're very clear, like they're not the same by any means. There was no no Asians allowed in baseball. Certainly not by the time Ichiro come in, but there were a lot of racism, a lot of this jingoism and stuff like that. And he was making major league fans challenge their understanding of the major leagues and of the players they rooted for and of players coming from different backgrounds. I think it really very much like Jackie Robinson.
Yeah. So I looked it up. The first Japanese player was Masanori Murakami. He played for the San Francisco Giants in the 60s, and he was a relief pitcher. So
Mm-hmm.
again, like Ichiro, and that's the thing. Like when Nomo came over in the 90s, like a couple of other pitchers followed him over the next decade, and there was a kind of like, okay, well, like Japanese players can pitch because like the mechanics of that are different and they depend less on like raw power. That's not true at
Right.
all. But like that again is like a combination of racism and like a misunderstanding of the physicality of sports, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then even after Ichiro, like because Ichiro was very much like a singles hitter. His career high, single season high in home runs is 15 in the majors.
Mm-hmm.
So even after him, like there was very much like a lingering racism of okay, like you got Ichiro, but you still can't have a Japanese power hitter. Like that's ridiculous.
Right.
Not, enter Shohei Otani, who's like hitting 40, 50 home runs, multiple time MVP. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
he's like very different because he also pitches, which is completely, has been historically unheard of for decades. But now he also is like changing the mold. Like Japanese born player can be a power hitter,
Mm-hmm.
but he is also changing what people think of, batter versus pitcher and like being able to do both. And now there are people, young people, high school, college, who are like, because at that age, most baseball stars do both. And then when they reach the majors, they kind of have to decide, do you want to be a pitcher
Right.
or do you want to be a batter? You can't do both in the majors. And now because of Otani, a lot of these players are like, why not? Why can't I do
Yeah.
both?
Why can't I keep doing both?
And so like I just love this continuing story of Japanese players coming to the majors and defying expectations in all kinds of realms.
Yeah. I mean, as a New York Mets fan, one of my favorite players of the 2000s was, and please correct my pronunciation, Kazuo Matsui, who was someone who he started his career in 1995 for the Cebu Lions, and then literally 9 years later he came over to the Mets in 2004, and we never made it to the World Series, but we were division champion winners. We went to the pennant a couple times with a strong team, and he was a very big part of that. And one of the things I remember was his base running, which is it just looked different than not like his running style, but just like the way he would dance on the bases. And my father would say, yeah, it reminded him of Jackie Robinson and some of like the players who came over from the Negro leagues, and just having a very different kind of style that would drive pitchers crazy. So yeah, so it's been a great
I had
thing.
to look that up because when you said that, I was like, that's not his name. Because there was also Hideki Matsui played for the New York Yankees
Yep.
around the same time. But yeah, you're absolutely Kazuo Matsui. Um,
Yeah, he's not a Hall of Famer, but he was a solid piece of a good team. And that's one of the fun things as fans is getting to root for these people who are not setting the world records, but are just great players or fun players to watch. All right, I think we've gone off enough, but we'll do more. I have some friends who do a sports podcast, so maybe I can get you and I on there to talk about baseball sometime,
uh,
or some of
I
the other
mean,
sports.
it honestly, like, if you want to talk sports, there are like ethical questions in sports, right? Like regarding cheating,
Oh
the
yeah,
Astros and the sign stealing, pitchers with the sticky stuff in recent seasons.
yep.
So we could definitely have a discussion about like the ethics of cheating in sports.
I mean, we've talked before about like what do you do with content that you enjoy from a very problematic author or problematic creator. I
Oh,
may face
well,
that as a Jets fan because not only do I think Aaron Rodgers is not the right quarterback for the Jets to have, in part because of all the reasons we're discussing, because I want them to develop a new quarterback, and Rodgers just sets that back for a couple more years. But also, he's a genuine horrible person. He's a major anti-vaxxer. He's done a lot of other pretty terrible things. And if the Jets start 8-0, I'm going to be in this really uncomfortable position of I'm a lifelong Jets fan. I don't know if I can just not root for the Jets, but having it be a horrible person who helps us win is going to be a really interesting ethical question. So, yeah, there's a lot we can definitely talk into. I think we'll definitely do a sports episode at some point.
Heck yeah.
Love it. Love it. All right. Thank you all so very much. We have JETS, 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 Jets.